there's between 2 and 4% of females that are able to raise startup money. Do you think it's because the people at the top calling the shots are all males?
Absolutely, yeah. We tend to invest in people that are like ourselves, people that we can see ourselves in, but we surround ourselves with people that are like us.
To me, the burnout is the absence of self-regulation. You don't have the mechanism to self-regulate, so that means that your yang energy takes control entirely and you push, you want more, and there's no mechanism within the team or yourself that helps you put a stop, right? Or say you're getting dangerously close to that burnout zone, take a chill pill now. When women have this capacity to do that much more.
I've seen people of all genders have burnout, and I don't think that it's an inherently sort of male thing to have to push so hard.
The micro trend that would lead to a more sustainable world is probably one that is led by women, in the sense that we need to slow the fuck down. I really invite everyone to do that more, to empower the female organization instead of sort of bashing them or setting them aside so that they sort of promote themselves in the short term, is to have the guts to support them and help them rise, because that will transform society.
Totally.
Welcome to the Climate Insiders podcast, where top climate thinkers, entrepreneurs, and investors share revolutionary ideas and insights. Tune in to learn from the visionaries shaping our sustainable future. Let's dive in. Alexandra, welcome to Climate Insiders.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
I'm very pumped to have this conversation with you, just impromptu and completely natural, to talk about VC, talk about climate, talk about diversity, talk about a number of topics, and but maybe just give you the opportunity to present yourself rapidly.
Great. I'm Alexandra Perez. My career has been in climate tech. I've been investing for about 4 years. And I love the space. I've recently been thinking about whether VC was for me, to be honest, because of some experiences I've had. But you know, now I'm in it still and loving it. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but it's changed a lot for the better. So.
Indeed, yeah. And one of the mega trends that we're observing is more people becoming angel investors, putting small tickets, you know, putting in their own capital. And yet we're yet to see more women getting involved in this whole trend. How could we motivate more women to get going?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. And I think there's a general trend, right, of I think there were, in Europe, there were like 400 and something female angel investors in 2022 and 2021 and 2022. And those numbers stayed really, really steady. And then in 2023, it completely fell off a ledge and it went down by 75%. And of course, that's because the market is harder and because money's more expensive. But it's incredible how much that affected female angel investors than it did males. And there's a general kind of insight there around, I don't know, maybe risk tolerance amongst the sexes. And we could talk for days about whether that's societally driven or what. I mean, nurture versus nature. But yeah.
Let's unpack that. Do you think that there is something innate to women that are more risk averse, or is just society kind of dictating that they should play a certain role and care more for security than males?
I mean, it's an age-old question. I think it's one where, in my view, it's probably more societally based. I mean, we're raised in such a way where it's play nice, be safe, be careful. And then the boys, it's, roughhousing is fine. Go, yeah, of course, take your bike and drive it off of a ramp and do this and do that. And of course, that's changing, but not at a immensely rapid rate. I think it's still, there are a lot of traditional values and not as many, it's not as sort of normal or cultural to push women in those directions. And that's a big part of this business, is you have to be super, super risk tolerant.
Right. And do you think as a woman in that space, to elevate yourself in the hierarchy, to climb up the ladder, you need to act more male? Do you need to mimic the metrics of success that really work well for males, but that seem a little counter-natural to women? Do you think it's unavoidable?
I kind of do. And this is another thing that's changing as you have more female-led funds. But those funds are also usually much smaller. Those are funds that are now going after this big issue around less represented founders raising smaller initial rounds, because then it's that funnel then is even smaller in the later rounds, right? It sets them up for a very tough journey. So you see a lot of female-led funds that only invest in underrepresented founders, but they're much smaller. They're not.
Why is that?
I think it's harder for them to raise capital. In general, it's harder for emerging managers to raise capital. But then when you add this next layer of maybe these people are less experienced, maybe they're not. Mm-hmm. In general, though, it's hard for female founders to get funding. That doesn't change if you're raising a VC fund or if you're starting your own company, right?
Right, exactly. It's a almost 1-for-1, right? So there's, I believe, between 2 and 4% of females that are able to raise startup money, and there's about the same proportion in the VC landscape. Do you think it's because the people at the top calling the shots are all males, so they tend to invest in who they are, right? So there's a bit of a mimicking here. You invest in what looks like you. And so to crack this open, we need to have more female LPs, government investors, people in control and in power, so that the capital can trickle down to more females. Is that
absolutely? Yeah, I think it's not just VC, right? Like, yes, we tend to invest in people that are like ourselves, people that we can see ourselves in, but we surround ourselves with people that are like us, right? I mean, that's how you choose your friends. Mm-hmm. It's very uncomfortable. You and I have talked a lot about diverse organizations and how do you create them. And it's one thing to create a diverse organization. It's another thing to have a diverse organization that actually flourishes. Those are two very different things. And so it's hard because a certain type of person goes into VC, mm-hmm. and that type of person invests in another certain type of person. The metrics that we have for success, raising big rounds, IPOs, I mean, those things are typically, particularly fundraising, is something that's innately kind of more male. It's you have to have this super grandiose vision. You have to really, really sell yourself, back yourself. That's not something women traditionally are good at. We tend to be able to talk about shorter term, more realistic goals instead of the long term world-changing vision. And of course, that varies from woman to woman. It's not a generalization by any means, but it's kind of just...
And do you think that women need to adopt a sort of grandiose long-term vision, more macro, zooming out, or the other way around? The VC industry need to accommodate and be a little more nimble and realistic?
It's a meeting in the middle, for sure. I don't think it's one thing or the other. It's just women learning those traits because you need to have both. But equally, it's investors being able to understand that seeing those achievable short-term goals is hugely important, right? I mean, how many board meetings have you been to on where the company actually hit the targets that they set out for themselves that quarter?
Given that I'm an early stage investor, pre-seed seed almost none of the time, but it's not really what we're asking them to do, right? To deliver on. We're asking them to deliver on enormous upside over 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
Right. So that macro by definition, right, by design, is something that our portfolio is constructed around this super long-term horizon. Yeah. So you're saying that we need to meet in the middle. Does that mean that we should lower the return on our expectations or try to build up a portfolio only looking 2 or 4 years out, or still look really long-term, but be very close to the portfolio and help them nurture the portfolio much more, basically to help them achieve their milestones?
I think it's because milestones add up, right? And I'm going to say something very cringe, but I've seen something in the past, which is incremental steps to awesomeness. It's like when you incrementalize something to such a degree that it makes it really clear how you get to that final big goal. But if you're always looking for that thing at the end of the horizon in 10 years, you might never get there if you don't do all the things that will get you there. As you're reaching these short-term goals, you're also figuring out, who are my customers? How do I actually achieve product market fit? How do I get those big customers into my client list? It's these questions that ultimately will decide whether you fail or win. And so there's a place to meet in the middle of the short-term balance with the long-term. Because you're right. In VC, we are looking at 5 to 10 year horizons in terms of trying to see a return. But how are you going to get there if you're never hitting your milestones?
Right. Talking about a meeting in the middle as well, and this is very strong in tech. as a whole, not just VC, is the fact that there's zero empathy. Because as a tech founder or as a tech investor, you need to be ruthless in your appetite to disrupt an entire industry, to make waves, to change, incumbents, and then let them transform alongside you. And that means that you cannot be empathetic in your way to get there, because it hinders your growth and it slows down, the upside. Unfortunately, we know now that is also leading to churn. It's leading to unhappiness. It's leading to a bit of this toxic thing that's very prominent. So how do we crack this?
Receive the Saturday Climate Insider, the only newsletter you need to invest in climate tech. Every Saturday, I send one actionable tip to thousands of investors and share my most precious tips and strategies. Don't miss out. Make sure to sign up today.
I think this particular topic, I think I could talk about for hours. And I think it manifests in a lot of different ways. One way that I'd love to start on is really around, okay, in 2021, the market was hot, especially in climate. We could raise. There was so much dry powder. Valuations were big. And so we were telling all of our portfolio companies at the time, growth. Throw money into things, hire. Yes, okay, let's see how you can go on geographic expansion. You have these 10 different alleys that you could go down all of them. Let's just see what happens. Come on. Yeah, just grow. And then within 12 months, it was like, we had plans for them to raise in 2022. All of a sudden, you're not going to be able to raise. In 22 or 2023, things got really hard. And all of a sudden it was like, you need to lay off all those people you just hired. You need to lay off 50%, 75% of the people that you currently employ and are the source of their livelihood. And, I think stereotypically, it might be easier for a man to say, okay, bye-bye, you're out. Sorry, that's the market. Whereas women, yes, I think because we have more empathy, that might be a harder task. I think it's very human. It's hard for any person to fire all these people, but I think maybe for women it might be even harder.
Right.
And so that's one way I get nervous, because sitting on someone's board, you have to push them to make these really hard decisions and really make them believe that you are sacrificing 50 jobs to save 100. And ultimately, that's for the greater good. This company won't exist in a year if you don't make those hard choices. But that's a really, really hard thing.
Those fluctuations that we observe, where we get over exuberant in a upside in a bull market and overly risk averse in a kind of current territory, clearly something that I never really understood when you see, and it comes from the top, right? You see the Googles and the Facebooks and Amazon laying off thousands, and it's completely accepted in our culture. It's notorious in the US because the labor market is much more volatile, less so in Europe. But still, I never really understood that. That means that you spend a decade to assemble a team, and then the HR department is flooded because they need to, hire people very, it spent a great amount of effort to source the right type of talent, and then you kind of wipe them out in just a matter of one call. Is this something where you should lower the upside, meaning hire slower, so that you can retain longer? And what would need to happen to make that cultural shift?
Yeah. And then again, like, does that have anything to do with being, having female or males at the top? I don't know, because
no.
The reality is you want to take advantage of that wave. And in venture capital, I mean, it's one thing to be Google and lay people off and give them 6 months severance. At a startup, you'll be lucky if you get 2 weeks severance. It's very different. Like, firing someone it's really harsh. It can be very harsh for founders and for employees. It's a tough thing. But to answer your question, I think the funniest thing I've observed in this industry was, let's go back to 2021, the history machine, and we all said over and over and over again, do you think we're in a bubble? This really feels like a bubble. There is definitely a bubble. When do you think it's going to burst? And every single analyst said, definitely within the next 18 to 24 months, if not sooner, this thing is going to change.
Yeah. And
so everyone had that awareness sort of somewhere in their prefrontal cortex. And yet we still pushed for growth, because you wanted to take advantage of the money that was there.
It's a great aspect of humans, yeah.
And it's the greed. And even though you know that downturn's around the corner, you want to take advantage of that wave.
Now going back to the cultural thing, and it's very difficult to pinpoint one item in the plethora of angles that we could look at. But from the diversity aspect, do you think if organizations or the entire industry were led by females, that would not happen?
Well, I do think that, I mean, the number of times I've heard women bring up those sorts of risks in rooms where decisions are being made, and they're kind of like, yeah, they kind of get brushed off, is countless, really. And again, it's because women do tend to be statistically more risk mitigating. But that's not the game we're playing. And you have to be like a little bit insane to think you can create a unicorn, to think you can be a founder of a unicorn, like to think you can find that one bet, that power law making company in your portfolio that's going to deliver 100x. You have to be like a little bit crazy.
Yeah. So there's something that I'm having a hard time reconciling is the fact that we should maybe lower down our risk appetite so that we don't go over exuberant, over parabolic, and then blow up top. Every cycle we see that. But at the same time, the entire VC industry, the tech industry, is a power law distribution, meaning there's a handful of companies that will become the next Googles and the Amazons, and everyone makes money off of that, right?
Totally.
Off of a few winners. So if you were to slow down, and not overexpose yourself on that super enormous risk exposure, you would maybe miss, right? You would miss out. And so how do we reconcile those two sides?
Yeah. Well, we're seeing a lot more funds now, particularly in climate tech, the sector that we work in, around more patient capital. And I think that's a big win in terms of what we're talking about here, because I think you can find those outliers, but you just give them a little more time to get there. And I think then you can start to weather these cyclical economic issues and really see if a founder has legs, if a team has legs, if a product has legs. You can really see it come to fruition. So I think more patient capital, funds with longer horizons, maybe 15, 20 years, like Breakthrough Energy, I think that makes a big difference. I think if you then combine that with female leadership and having more VCs and female VCs in positions of power, you could end up with a very sustainable industry.
Yes.
And that's the difference, right?
And to turn the culture sustainable, that means that women that are gaining control and ownership into funds or startups or even LPs should not corrupt themselves in a way, right? They should not turn themselves into males or trying to mimic the dominant thing. How do we empower them to take control and respect themselves, their core values, and make things more sustainable?
Totally. I mean, the number of women I know that feel they are inauthentic every day in the workplace because that they know that they have to play that role in order to gain respect, to be heard, to move forward is ridiculous. And so it's a fantastic question, and I think it's one that gets talked about a lot in terms of women in tech or feminists in tech, and I think it takes male allies. I hate to use those kind of cliche words, but it does take male allies to, for example, rectify a situation that happens a lot where, say, a woman says an idea at a table and she gets a bit passed over, and then 30 minutes later, one of her male peers says the same thing, and everyone says, "Oh my gosh, Jared, what a great idea!" And that is, and then if you have somebody, especially in leadership, who can then say, "Actually, Joanna just had that idea," and so.
No, I witnessed that, and absolutely, you're exactly right. So, another way to motivate male allies is for them to seize that opportunity because there is such a gigantic upside, and because VCs are notorious for seizing micro trends, right, riding them.
Yes.
They need to understand that the micro trend that would lead to a more sustainable world is probably one that is led by women, in the sense that we need to slow the fuck down. We need to slow down our industries, the consumption, the production rate. We need to do things very differently. And this is the holistic approach, not just more technology and more green growth, is alternative forms of growth. And women, and I see that in every aspect of life, they're more prone to this, is more natural. they're more nurturing, it's more grounding, as a culture. And so it's innate. And so if we were to kind of flip the script and put female in control, I think this is the type of culture we would promote. And so the male allies that see that as a macro trend from a kind of VC angle, saying you want to ride the next opportunity, should provide more support. And I really invite everyone to do that more, to empower the female in the organization instead of sort of bashing them or setting them aside so that they sort of promote themselves in the short term, is to have the guts to support them and help them rise, because that will transform society.
Totally. And as you say, I would love for men to be able to take that on. But for many, it's not innate, right? It really takes a daily effort. Even when you're stressed out with 500 million other things, you need to think, I need to have that in my mind and make sure that I'm kind of bringing that forward as I make business decisions, and create a culture in my own business. It's tough. It's really, really tough, because that's one of 7 million things that you need to have at the forefront.
Wow, and it's great that you bring this up. And we were chatting offline, and I was blown away by the example you brought up on the kind of conversation that a woman manager would have with anyone in the team, right? Just checking in. The kind of stuff that we do not value in the microeconomic, context and structure. And would you just share maybe that story of, someone checking in on you?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. I think this was a great female leader that I had in a previous role. And she, after I would give a presentation, she would call me at the end of the day and say, how do you think that went? And just check in. And I would say, I think it went well in these ways and maybe not so well in these ways. And she would say, okay, yeah, I agree here and I don't agree there. And, we'd talk through, and she'd say, okay, for next time, I remember these things. I thought you did this really great. Also, if you want to really get ahead of this, maybe answer these questions before anybody asks them and send them out, because it'll just make you look like you're really on the ball, and you are, so you should be just presenting yourself that way. And the fact that she just had my back when she didn't have to, she wasn't my line manager, she was just a person who wanted to see another woman succeed. And she did that for everyone in the team. But was she compensated for that additional time she was taking? Like, no, she wasn't. And so, that is fucking fantastic, right? That's altruistic. That's incredible. And it's just a value she holds and represents in business. So yeah, I think something we talked about was, okay, if you could actually dedicate 20% of your time to mentorship, and that's part of your job description, that is interesting. But how do you make that not transactional? It's not a tick box. You have then a worksheet. Okay, are they doing this? Are they doing that?
It has to be organic, natural. It's something that comes, and again, with women much more than men. And I think it's a fabulous example, because when you were telling me this story, I was like, I never thought of this. Meaning, it's light years away from the thinking of a man to sort of dedicate 20% of his time to just empathetically, with nothing on the line, just ring someone in the team and just provide support. And some of them do, of course. We cannot overly generalize, but it's clearly not the mainstream. And it's so remote from our thinking, because we're always going to try to add more value to the organization in terms of analytical and rational neocortex kind of thing, is doing more analysis, more outreach, more deals, and not so much caring for the team. And that should definitely be taken into account.
Totally. And it's something that you're very well versed in is burnout, right? We've talked about it so many times. You've experienced it even more than once, I think. And I think this is a way you kind of avoid burnout, right? You have a more sustainable person who can perform more highly on a daily basis, because they have time to turn off. They have time to have balance. Because I think, in our industry, in venture capital, a lot of people come from finance. A lot of people come from consulting. And as much as we want to think that we're different, and that was a previous life, often those values still very much present themselves. And those are very male values of like, it is a badge of honor to work till 1, 2, 3 in the morning. And and then but you were back in the office 9 a.m. the next day. Like, oh yeah, I really respect that. Why? Why do we respect that?
That's I'm looking forward to that time when we're gonna look back saying that was completely ridiculous, and I fully agree with you. To me, the burnout is the absence of self-regulation. You don't have the mechanism to self-regulate, so that means that your yang energy takes control entirely, and you push, push, push. You want more, more, more. You want to diversify, do more, 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 and there's no mechanism within the team or yourself that helps you put a stop, right? Or say you're getting dangerously close to that burnout zone. Take a chill pill now. When women have this capacity to do that much more. So beyond even helping the team, feel empowered and take more ownership and control, it also helps the people at the top, avoid the burnout, which has terrible consequences. I mean, it really affects. It can push people to implode and then leave organization or make drastic changes in their life when if they were to take more the slower slope, they would have managed to sustain that over another 10 years. And then the impact would be commensurable, much greater than taking that shortcut.
Totally. And I don't think burnout is I've seen people of all genders have burnout. And I don't think that it's an inherently sort of male thing to have to push so hard. I know a lot of women who feel that same urge and need. But I do think that all of these things kind of are related.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one analogy I've heard, and this is just something I'm thinking about now, I'd love your thoughts on this. An analogy I heard for high performers in business is, high performing athletes, you have two kinds, right? You have ones who train, and then when they have an event or something important coming up, then they train really hard. They train really hard for that one thing, and then they kind of hit this peak, and then afterwards they rest. And they kind of go down to a more sustainable thing, and then again, up and down, you have these peaks and troughs. But actually, science shows that the very, 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 very best, the cream of the crop, high performance athletes, they're always performing at kind of an 80%.
Mm-hmm. They never push it to 100.
And then they push very small up and then kind of back down there. But they're always kind of steadily at 80.
It's funny you mentioned this. Weightlifters are notorious for this. The day they go to the Olympics or they do a competition, they will never push to 100%. It's counterintuitive, but 80% will get them the medal.
Are you enjoying the podcast? Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button now and stay updated with the latest in climate tech.
And again, I'm not sure exactly how that relates, but it feels related. I think, when you're constantly having this okay, I have to get this one meeting done. I have to do this one presentation. I have to secure this investor. And it's the up and the down, up. I can just imagine your central nervous system is just being fried over and over and over again. And I can't imagine that's good for longevity, let's say.
Right. I cannot, emphasize this enough. Is just the self-regulation is the way to succeed in the long run. And I would put it on the count that we want to take shortcuts in life because we are comparing ourselves too much, right? In our 20s is very much trying to catch up on the guys that are outliers that have already succeeded even by the time they're 30. So you're always trying to play catch up. In your 30s is, I want to succeed before I have children, or I want to succeed for my children to leave them a legacy, or to, make sure that there's something behind that bears my name. And then even in your 40s and 50s is, I want to show the right example. I want to make sure that I've lived, a worthwhile life. And so there's always that metric of success because we maybe want to leave something behind or just play catch up. And going back to the redefinition of metrics of success and alternative forms of growth, I find for myself, whenever I pull out for a month or 2 months, you escape from that bubble, especially the Western world. And on the Eastern philosophy, it's very different. It's always community oriented, meaning we succeed as a community, not as an individual. And that means that the metrics of success are completely different. It's the opposite. That means nurturing your environment, yourself, taking care of you is the number one metric of success. That is such a more long-term sustainable way of operating.
And you hear this thing of, make sure you put on your own oxygen mask before you put it on the person next to you. And it's that. So if you're at the top, if you're setting that example of I work until I die at my desk, that's exactly what people are going to think is what success looks like, and I don't think it does.
And I think it's so important that for VCs, investors that are considered at the top of that capital stack, and I would argue that the guys even at the top, or LPs or institutional investors, government funds, but I guess those guys were VCs before, or they're in the banking finance world in another way, right? But it's very important for VCs and investors to show the path to founders because they're looking up to us. Every time, I was visiting a portfolio company the other day, and as soon as the team, learned that an investor was, checking in and visiting them, is like, all hands on deck. We're gonna make sure that they have a great time. We're gonna show them, and they would never do this for other founders or any other member of the team. But so we are kind of regarded as the sort of, ultimate respect holders. And so we have a responsibility to show the way and to print a different culture here.
Totally. And there's actually one example that I think is very concrete that I'd love to bring up. And that's around, you talked about leaving something for your children. What's the legacy? Your 30s are about making sure that you have your nest egg before you go and have children. Well, okay, classic thing. Women have a time clock on that, right? Men, not so much. And you can wait until your 40s. To have children, to do whatever you'd like to do in terms of family planning. Women can, but it's a bit more risky, But one thing I see often is, okay, perhaps in a venture capital context, you can afford to, for example, give equal maternity and paternity leave. And the expectation when that person is away on this leave is that they are not working, okay? And you want the same thing because often you see, because women often are more needed during those early months because of natural biological reasons, they are not working, but then men will go on leave and then they're still answering emails. They're still kind of coming into the office every so often or whatever. It's like, no, you go focus on your family because what we're trying to create here is gender equity by giving you both the same amount of time so that you can contribute to your household and at home, go do that thing. And that's fine when you have management fees coming in off of a fund. And that money's always rolling in. When you're at a startup, what I've heard from a lot of founders when they say, yeah, okay, because we have to statutorily give women an 8 number of weeks, but men, we only have to give 2 weeks, They're like, well, that's all we can afford. We don't have the money to set up those kinds of policies. We can't give both of them 6 months full pay. It's just not possible for us. We'll go out of business. Right. And I think that is really something to think about. It's like, how do you create that equity? It's expensive. And so do you put that into a business plan? Do you make sure when you're a venture capitalist, you're asking questions around what are your parental leave policies? Because we want to make sure that's, that will lead to more diversity in your team. And we think that's something important. Is that actually important to us then? Because it might mean the company doesn't grow as fast. Actually, it certainly means the company won't grow as fast if they're, people are off for 6 months, 12 months.
How could we think more creatively on parking away enough capital to make this happen at the industry scale, right? So that there's no standalone, VCs or organizations or startups doing it standalone, and there's no reward mechanism for them to do this. And I've seen this at every level, and also I've seen female LPs bringing up the conversation. Oh, your teammate is pregnant now, so what is the plan? And then there's a kind of awkward silence in the room saying, well, we don't really have a plan, and so how are you going to replace it? Are we going to invest in this team when one core member will be out for another 9 months? So what do we do here? So there's a lot of, it is a big taboo still in the industry, throughout society. So how could we think creatively, kind of brainstorming here? Would it take like a massive fund at the government scale or state that just basically would take ownership of those, like an envelope of capital to be so that male and female would take the equal amount of, and so that it would no longer be a differentiation factor.
Exactly. And that's what you see in Scandinavian countries, right? Is that you do get, I think it's 6 months or a year paid, both men and women. And so often you see the women take the first year and then the men take the second year.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of men with prams in cafes and things with 2-year-olds. It's like a very common thing. And because it's societally very normal, people don't even think twice about it. But again, it requires, those countries are smaller, they're much smaller populations. That's really something that's very hard to pull off as a government. That has to be Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough one, but I do think, yes, that is the ultimate answer.
And so one way to sort of, I can relate to this, for example, in Berlin, it's a bit of a baby factory the last 5 years. It's insane where the entire country, Germany, is going down in terms of nativity. And the opposite is happening in Berlin, which is a tech hub of Germany, because the government has made it such an easy policy for women and men to take up to 1 year or 2 years, which is ridiculous from a US angle, right?
Oh my gosh.
How would you make this happen? It's working really well, and it's such an incentive. But what we notice is that when a woman or a man takes 1 year or 2 years off, they're coming back, they're rewired. They don't think about careers and growth the same way. And I would argue that they've elevated themselves, right? Going back to those alternative forms of growth and new metrics of success. If we were to revamp this, that means that you would win by taking that 1 year off, work on yourself, grow, become a better human, become more empathetic, nurture your environment, care for others. And so you're gaining in points, if you will. You're coming from a 6 out of 10, or very little empathy, to 8 out of 10 because now you're a parent. And so the benefits trickle down in every aspect of society.
Totally, absolutely.
Well, Alexandra, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Great that we touched on so many topics like this.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was lovely to be interviewed by you. You're great at this job, huh? Turns out.
You too. Thanks so much. I'm sure there's so many Pandora's boxes that we can open.
Yeah.
Diversity was a big one today. Hopefully we'll have more episodes in the future.
Yeah, lovely to have this time.
Namaste. Cheers. Thanks.
Bye.
Ready to make a substantial impact on our planet's future? Join the Climate Insiders community today. We are a group of investors committed to supporting bold, moonshot startups that are tackling climate change head on. Become a part of a new generation of climate investors and help us create a sustainable future. Visit climateinsiders.com to join now.